So, dear audience, I'm glad to see so many of you here attending this lunch talk of EIT Digital. Today we have a special guest star, Miemo Penttinen from Funzi Ltd. That is a startup doing social innovations. And the topic of today is products for developing countries, intercultural design and technical challenges there. And Miemo Penttinen has a background in computer science and as well as in photography, and so he's a part-time or freelance photographer, and then he acts as a CXO, Chief Experience Officer of this Funzi company, and let's hear what we have to do with the products for developing countries.
All right, thank you, and thanks for popping by. It's really good to see so many of you here, and it's good to be back here at EIT. So Funzi was actually based here until just a couple of months ago when we jumped ship to another location nearby, and I really like the premises, and I really like the concept of this lunch talk, and I've been through quite a many of these when we were working from here. So it's nice to be on this side of the table, so to speak, as well. So I'm going to be talking about mobile in emerging markets. What are the kind of potentials there? How the situation changed, evolved during the years, and what's going to happen in the upcoming years? And also what is the challenges for designing for these markets where things are pretty different than compared to what we have here in the Western countries. So my talk is going to be divided into two parts. First, I'm going to be setting the kind of overall scene in the emerging markets, and then on the later part, the second part, talk about what are the practical challenges in doing work for these. But first, just a few words about myself and Funzi, the product and the company that we are working on. So yeah, I'm a designer, entrepreneur, and photographer. My background is in digital agencies, so I used to work around 15 years here in Helsinki, most of that in a company called Frantic, which is one of the oldest and largest digital agencies here in Finland. And for the last parts of my career there, I was working as the design director, so really kind of overseeing multiple aspects of design. My core competencies personally in the field of design are in interaction design, design management, content strategies, so kind of balancing between the strategic level of design and also working on some of the kind of mostly non-visual parts of the design process, but also some parts of the visual design as well, especially now that we are kind of a small startup, so I've been doing more and more of the visual designs myself as well. Previously, I used to work with major local companies here like Nokia, Neste Oil, Helsingin Sanomat, and doing really kind of wide variety of cases for ranging from news, maps, travel, teleconferencing, health, and so on. But it's now been kind of interesting to really focus on just one thing at one startup and really just dig deep into that. So a few words about Funzi as well. So what we do at Funzi is that we deliver practical learning in bite-sized form for mobiles. And this bite-sized learning then allows people to learn during the small idle moments we all have during our busy lives. So maybe instead of having a cigarette break or playing a round of Angry Birds on your mobile, you actually might do a bit of kind of micro-learning and gradually then actually learn new skills that are able to then improve your life. And our initial focus has been on places and people where learning has the most potential for impact. And so we're talking about emerging markets, and especially young aspirational people there who have great desire to learn new things, but the education systems in the countries where they live in is not able to kind of support those desires very well. So we're trying to help them in that. We first built an Android app that came out about a year ago today, and now we have several thousands of users in several countries in Africa, and they have been really happy with the product. So we have an average of 4 stars on Google Play reviews, and the 1-star reviews are because of some technical difficulties in certain range of low-end devices, and I'll come to those challenges a little bit later. And we also constantly keep on getting feedback from our end users in Africa, saying things that they have learned, things that they never learned in school, or that they have been able to start their own businesses because of what they learned at Funti. So it feels that we are already kind of making an impact in people's lives in the emerging markets. And we also have a fairly new mobile site, so kind of a second product alongside of the Android, and this is available at the address funti.mobi, and we are part of Facebook's internet.org project, which is aiming to deliver costless access to those people who haven't yet been online. And this new mobile site really works on any mobile browser. You don't need to have a smartphone to use it, so it works on Nokia devices, for example. So we have been able to kind of expand the reach with this new product. I'll come back to that a little bit later. So let's move on to the first major part of the presentation. So set the scene of the emerging markets today, mobile there, and look at one kind of major paradigm shift that has been happening, and at the same time look at one thing that hasn't changed that much. So let's start with the paradigm shift first, and let's start with a kind of a trivia question for you, the audience. So what is your estimate? How many billion adults do we have in the world today? Just shout out the first number that comes to your mind.
5, 4,
5, 4. Somebody said 2, 3. Okay, it's between 2 to 5. So it's actually 5 billion adults today out of the whole population of about 7 billion. And then a second trivia question for you. How many mobile users are there in the world today?
2. So you define mobile user. 5.
Person who has their own mobile device, no matter smartphone, feature phone, what kind?
2 billion.
2, 5,
6.
7, okay. It's 3.5 billion people today. So out of 5 billion adults, that's really quite high number, I mean, compared to that. And mobile, actually, the mobile phone is the first technological product that almost every single person on the planet has purchased. No other similar kind of technical product has been as widely adopted, as quickly as mobile phones. And that's really exciting. And here's a bit more details about the same thing. So the gray bars here are where we are now, and then the estimated growth for the 2020, so in 5 years, is on the orange. And you can kind of see already that the mobile is closing on the number of adults in the world, and it will still reach higher number of people in just 5 years. But what is really interesting here is that what is going to happen in the next 5 years for people who will have access to online and who will have smartphones. So what will actually happen is that by 2020, 80% of the adults on our Earth will have a smartphone. And that at the same time means that 80% of the adults will have an online access. And let's do a quick poll. How many of you have smartphone? Okay, so pretty much everybody raised their hands. So the growth, this growth, and this growth is not going to be coming from us, clearly. So it's coming from somewhere else. And it's, of course, coming from the emerging markets. So the emerging markets population is the one that will kind of be representing these orange bars. at least on these two occasions. And one of the reasons why that is happening is that the entry price for Android has dropped dramatically in just a couple of years. So iPhones are priced about the same as PCs in general, because they pretty much are equivalent of PCs today, as powerful and as multi-talented. Android, of course, has a much more broader range of devices, and hence the average cost for Android is much lower, but it's still $300-something, so it's more than most people in the emerging markets can afford. But the kind of extreme low end of Android has now devices that cost only $35, and that's already an amount that people in the emerging markets can pay for their mobile. They actually have been paying that for the Nokia devices, the feature phones previously. So let's zoom in on one part of these emerging markets where this change is happening, and that's Africa, and more specifically the sub-Saharan Africa, so pretty much that area of the map that you see there in the background. And some basic statistics from that area. So in sub-Saharan Africa, about 60% of the population has access to clean or cleanish water, meaning that they can maybe drink it or at least bathe in it without being badly sickened by the effects. And the coverage for grid-based electricity is about 30%, and grid-based here meaning that they get the electricity about the same way that we do, just plugging in on the power, and it's connected to a large grid that provides the electricity to them. And based on these two figures, again, trivia question for you: what would you estimate that what is the amount of population in sub-Saharan Africa that has access to mobile?
90.
70.
90, 70,
40.
40.
Do you mean smartphone?
No, just any mobile. Okay, broad range is from 30 to 90. It's 40%. So it's 10 percentage points more than have access to grid electricity. It's kind of mind-blowing if you think about it. So how do they charge the phones if they don't have electricity? But of course they have other means of getting electricity. They have solar power, they have aggregators, and so on. But it really kind of also tells about the success story of the mobile. So it has larger reach of population than electricity. It's kind of crazy. And one thing that we need to always remember when we're talking about Africa is that it's really, really huge place with a huge amount of population. So that 40% of sub-Saharan population, that's about 380 million people. And that's approximately the same amount of people that live in South America all along. So we're talking about really huge amount of people. But yes, not all of these people have access to internet yet. So the mobile internet penetration is 23% currently, but it's still 1/4 of the overall population. And like we saw in the earlier stats, it's increasing really rapidly at this point. And this is still about 220 million people. And that's about the same amount of people who live on the 4th populated country in the world, which is Indonesia. And that's approximately 70% of the whole population of the US. So we are really talking about a major market already today who have a mobile internet access in sub-Saharan Africa today. And from that we really come to the major paradigm shift. So people in the emerging markets, in Africa, in some Asian countries, in South America, are moving from these kind of devices, which were mostly used just for voice, just for texting, into these devices, which are low-cost smartphones, again, now at this $30, $25 price range, now available for these people for the first time ever. So because they're cheap, there have been some compromises, of course, so they are not comparable to smartphones we use, but still, they can connect to all data networks that are available, cellular or Wi-Fi. They run apps, they are operated by touch. So basically they are smartphones in the same way that we have been using here for the last 7 or 8 years now. And that's really a huge thing. So this really transformative paradigm of apps that we have been familiar with for the last 7 or 8 years is now available for the people in the emerging markets. And if you think how our own lives have been changing during these 7 to 8 years, so you can think of how you communicate now with your friends, how you get your information now compared to 8 years back. There's been a major shift. And think of the industries that have been disrupted by this change that has happened here in the Western markets. Think about media, accommodation, music, photography. So all these new app-based players have been disrupting all the old hundreds or at least decades of years of old companies. So Kodak is out of business because iPhone is now the most popular camera on the planet. Airbnb is heavily disrupting the hotel industry. Facebook and Twitter are the main sources for media for most people today, instead of New York Times or Helsingin Sanomat anymore. And everybody listens to music from Spotify, so music is now a commodity, so nobody buys CDs anymore. And kind of then take this shift that has happened here in the Western markets and transform that into emerging markets and kind of think that what is the potential of change for the societies there. And in many ways it's actually going to be even bigger, the potential for change, than what we had here, because if you look at our lives 8 years back, we already had desktop and laptop computers with internet access. So we had kind of some parts of this disruption already happening, that the mobile just kind of made it really, really big. But in the emerging markets, mobile for the most people is the first and only access to internet. And in that way, I think the shift that's going to be happening there is going to be even bigger than what happened here for us. So something really big cooking has been happening lately, and is going to happen even more in the upcoming 5 years. But at the same time, there are things which still haven't changed at all, especially in the emerging markets. And one is education. So even though there have been some success stories in getting education, learning to be better available for people in the emerging markets, the basic fact still remains the same, that people don't have equal access to quality learning. There are a lot of kind of really hard, difficult societal issues that cause this, and they are really hard to kind of solve. So let's look at kind of some stats from that as well. So one problem is the access to learning. So there are 17 countries where more than 25% of the kids have never been to a primary school. And without even this kind of most basic education, then what are your chances of building a good life for yourself? Very slim. But it's also about the question of the quality of the education, quality of the learning. So there are also 25 countries where less than half of the kids of the primary school age have learned the basics of mathematics. So even though they might have an access to learning, the quality that they get out of that is not very good. And let's look at one stat in a little bit more detail. So in sub-Saharan Africa, there are over 56 million people between ages of 15 to 24 who have not completed the primary school. And that really means that they don't have these basic skills required for getting employment, living a prosperous life. And they would need some other ways of getting that education. And that 56 million people is 1/3 of that age group. So it's really a huge waste of human resources that is happening. And that 56 million people again, to give a kind of a scope of Africa, that 56 million people is approximately the same amount of people who live in UK, or amount of people who live in Italy, or who live in France. So kind of just imagine that the whole population of UK wouldn't have basic education. What would it do for that country, or just Europe in general? But like I said, the kind of way of solving this on the country level, on the organizational levels of the basic education, it's really hard. So I think, or we at FUNSE kind of believe that if we are able to provide these alternative pathways for people to actually get this basic education, get the skills they need to build their lives, then we actually can do something that has a really real meaning. And that's what we kind of have been focusing on. So we really believe that combining the reach of the mobile with the impact of learning, we can really do something that's really transformative for these societies and for these people. So really helping these people reach their full potential and helping the countries where they live in. So that kind of concludes the first part of the presentation. So you should now have a pretty good understanding of why we are doing the things we are doing at FUNSE, basically because of this. And also what is the kind of mobile situation in the emerging markets. So let's move on to the second part, the more kind of practical things of actually building things for the emerging markets, and mobile there more specifically. So one major part here, of course, is the cultural constraints. So how do you design for an audience that is very different from yourself and lives on the other far side of the globe? So it's kind of really easy to design things if you design things for yourselves, and that's kind of the modus operandi for many startups, that we kind of figure out a kind of small problem in our Western lives and then improve that quite a bit. And that can of course lead to huge improvements, like we discussed earlier. Airbnb has done major shift in the economics of how accommodation works, for example. But they kind of started with a relatively easy task from design point of view, really kind of fixing things for themselves first. But of course the kind of rules of design are the same, whether you're designing something for yourself or your friends or somebody else at the far reach of the globe. You first need to know your users, know your audience. But then how do you go about that when they are, again, really far away from you and really different from your nearby people? And that's where the rule number 2 comes at play. So take shortcuts where you can. And this is especially important for startups, because many startups don't have huge upfront fundings. So if you would do a research project in Africa to really get an understanding of the lives of people live there, it might take several months. It might cost probably at least tens of thousands of euros, maybe even hundreds. So it might be kind of far-reaching to sell to your investors that we need to do this. So there are some shortcuts you can take while still kind of gaining an understanding of the audience who's far away. And one good hint is to talk to people who have come more close by to you, who are from those markets. So talk to exchange students from your target countries or cultures that are similar to the people you are targeting. Talk to migrants. There are huge amounts of immigration happening in Europe, and a lot of that is happening from the emerging markets. So there's a lot of people you can talk to now, even here in Finland, who know much more about the situation in the emerging markets than we do here. And there's of course a lot of publicly available shortcuts that you can try to find. So there's a lot of research being done on the emerging markets. You can try to kind of pinpoint your target groups geographically and based on the problems that you are solving. So that's also what we did at FUNSE as one solution. So we kind of dug up different kind of research that organizations like UNESCO or GSMA had done about education on the emerging markets or the mobile in the emerging markets. So that at least gives you some kind of head start into what the situation there is. But we were also kind of really lucky with Funtsi because two of our co-founders had previously been tackling with these same kind of issues in their previous jobs. So they had been working on heavily on this Nokia Life Tools service, which had, let's see, more than 100 million users in the emerging markets. So they were still, so that was operational something like from 5 years back. So it was really focused on these feature phone Nokias, but still talking about the same approximate audience. Nokia had done really extensive studies, done 40,000 interviews in 17 countries, and two of our co-founders had been heavily involved in this. So they had pretty much all the knowledge we needed in their heads to get an understanding of what are needs of people in the emerging markets related to learning and what kind of lives they live. And based on that information, we then kind of narrowed things down a little bit, because just kind of trying to teach everybody in the emerging markets is just too broad of a challenge. So we narrowed our focus into young, urban, mobile-centric people who are really highly aspirational, meaning that they understand that to get ahead in their lives, they need to improve their skills, learn new things, and kind of rise on the ladders of the society that way. And we also narrow things to people who know English at least as a secondary language, have access to smartphone and use data connections. And we've now broadened on these criteria a little bit with the new mobile site that is accessible without smartphone. And we also have courses in, for example, Swahili and Arabic at the moment. And then, of course, we did what every startup and company should do, distill that understanding of the users into personas that have a kind of a name and face, and we know what kind of situations they live in and what are their aspirations personally, what do they want to achieve. And again, based on these personas, we were able to kind of narrow things down on the topics or the contents of what are we teaching the people. So the core focus has really been on the livelihood, job readiness, entrepreneurship, career things. So this is the kind of, if you think about the Maslow hierarchy, this is the kind of basic need you need to have solved in order to kind of be interested in learning about other things. So if you're not making a living, you're not interested about other stuff. And then well-being, of course, is kind of there at the bottom of the Maslow hierarchy as well. So that's kind of our core focus and where we believe that where we can make the most impact on the lives of these people, focusing on these topics. Learning is a bit of more general thing, not in the core at the moment. So third rule, again, really basic stuff from any design projects. So you need to test whatever you built with real users. So even if you didn't have access to people in the beginning in your target groups, when you have something at hand, you would really need to get out there, reach your target markets, and see how people react to the prototype or the product that you have at hand. And that's also, of course, what we did. So about a year ago, we ran a set of user tests in South Africa, in Cape Town, with a kind of a basic usability lab studies where we were able to observe how people use the product, did also some interviews to get a better understanding of how they react to the product and what are the needs that we kind of guesstimated correct or not. And we got really good feedback, so people felt that how Funtsi teaches things makes sense to them. They felt that the stuff that they learned really had an impact on their lives, and they felt kind of compelled to keep on using it, which is of course a good thing for any app. And these are really kind of super important in a multiple levels. So of course you need to kind of validate that what you have built is is important and it makes sense for the end users. But also this is a good opportunity to get a better understanding of their lives, to actually see them if you haven't been able to get in touch with them previously, and kind of build that empathy that you need to really understand the situations they live in. And this is also really good for the whole team that you work in. So even if you are the designer and you kind of understand the need for this kind of thing, you need to convince your CEO, your product managers, and the rest of the team to also join in and start building that empathy for themselves as well. Because way we are wired as humans, when we actually see people, we understand their situation much, much better. And if you just hand out a document to a CEO saying that, okay, this is what they said, they will not get the same kind of an understanding in their guts than what they get from actually seeing things and actually talking to these people. Okay, so those were the kind of 3 rules. Then if you think about the kind of challenges you face as doing design for people from different cultures, what makes the challenge a little bit easier is that the fundamentals of design, the kind of how it works stuff, the interactions, the behaviors, and things that are really based on human psychology and how we are as humans, that is fairly solid foundation for all humans. So there's not that much variance there between different cultures. But where there is actually quite a lot of variety in what people prefer and how they perceive things is on the how it looks layer of design. So the visual design, the style, the fashion, and so on. But the good thing is that kind of this usually is the kind of core of your design work. And if you do this well, then it's kind of really relatively well scalable to all the cultures. But then again, this can change quite a lot, but then again, it's also at the same time rather easy to fix, modify, even customize per target audience if necessary. And even though there's kind of not that much variance between cultures here, it doesn't mean that the same solutions would work for all the people. So actually the differences here come to play when we talk about different user types or groups. So some people, for example, might be really kind of focused on accomplishing one single task in your application. They have just really kind of narrow focus, and I want to do this single thing. And other people just are more kind of an explorers. They want to kind of wander around, see what is there. And these kind of archetypes of people exist in all cultures. But you also need to understand the archetypes and build the product for the archetypes that you kind of need to have decided to prioritize. But the archetypes really, again, exist in all the cultures, so there's not much change there. So just kind of give you a couple of examples of the cultural differences that we ran into, or the kind of we need to figure out on this how it looks level. There's a bit of more kind of a trivia bits, but still one important aspect of the how it looks is of course the colors. And colors have really a lot of variety in how people perceive colors in different cultures. So the classic example of course is the black and white. So in Western countries, black is often connected with, if you think about clothing, black is connected to funerals. So people wear dark black clothes to funerals. And we wear white for weddings. But in a lot of Asian countries, it's exactly the opposite. But of course, it's not so black and white that you could just kind of think that black is a negative thing in Western markets. Because, for example, black can also mean luxury here. So if you have black color combined just a little bit of gold or yellow, it's kind of feels more of a luxurious thing maybe for us here in the Western markets. This is just one slightly confusing infogram on how cultures read different colors. But there are, of course, plenty of other background materials you can tap into on the colors and different cultures. So with Funzi, we chose a color range of bright oranges and yellows, because it really was a good match for our kind of uplifting, inspirational, mood that we kind of wanted to go for. So it had a tick those marks in most cultures. Then one interesting thing that I didn't personally know was the kind of illustrations versus photographs. So based on the Nokia Life studies and interviews, it became apparent that a lot of people in these emerging markets felt that when they came across illustrations as a kind of main way of having the visual theme for your app or whatever, they felt that it didn't feel as kind of valuable than the same thing with a photograph of the same thing. Again, this is probably not this black and white, but still it was an interesting thing because we have in the Western markets, again, we have been using illustrations quite a lot in the recent years. It's been kind of a trend in web design. So kind of whatever trends you come across here in the Western markets, they might not be trends in your target markets if you are reaching the emerging markets. So kind of do your background work, background studies there as well. And again, one thing that kind of came as a surprise, so this is a famous Tumblr blog showing photos of people scanning QR codes. There haven't been any posts yet since 2012. It's of course a joke that people really don't use QR codes in the Western markets a lot. And whenever people try to slam them on advertising here, you kind of get derogative comments that, okay, nobody's going to use that, you're just wasting your space and making it ugly. But actually QR codes are really a thing, at least in Africa and China. So for example, here's a person who is selling the Big Issue magazine in South Africa, I think. And the way to do the purchase is to scan that QR code that the person has on her clothing. So it's really used everywhere. It's used for mobile payments, like here. It's used in all the advertising. And the crazy stuff that in China, desktop sites have QR codes in them. It's kind of really what? Why would I scan it? But it's really so ubiquitous way of getting a link to your mobile phone and doing some interaction that it really makes sense to put a QR code on a website that people just scan it on their mobile to do something related to that page. So again, really tells that whatever you're accustomed here might not be the case in the other markets. So then a few words about the technical constraints. So really about designing for these low-end devices. You really need to keep on reminding yourself that the smartphone that you use, the relatively new iPhone or approximately priced Android phone, is not the phone that people will be using in the emerging markets. So kind of whatever paradigms you use in your favorite apps, they might not work on these devices because of various constraints. There's a lack of CPU power, meaning that just whatever computations are needed to get stuff displayed, animated, calculated, it will take ages on these phones. They're really lacking on memory, RAM, which also means you need to be really considerate of what things to keep in memory, keep displayed on screen. The screens are really tiny compared to stuff that we use here. So they're really about half, even smaller. And they are tiny in physical size, but also tiny in the resolution. So they can be something like 240 times 320, meaning that pixels are relatively huge, and you can't do any kind of fine-lined design elements. Like iOS icons are now this really fine-lined since iOS 7 or 8. So anything like that would look horrendous on these low-resolution screens. And there's also a lot of really old Android versions out there on these devices. And even though these are technical constraints, when you're a designer, you kind of need to keep these in mind, because otherwise you kind of end up having designed something that really just doesn't work because of these constraints. And that was kind of one thing that we ran into and learned the hard way during our process. So we kind of didn't accommodate these constraints early enough in the designing of the Android app. but it's improving quite rapidly. So in 5 years of time, when the growth for the people who have access to smartphones in the emerging markets has kind of reached its almost full potential, people, of course, will be using much better devices. And they already have access to quite nice devices if they are able to chip out $100, for example. So Chinese companies like Xiaomi has been doing really beautiful, well-functioning devices in that price range. Google has been really pushing also the emerging markets with their Android One initiative. So they, I think, first built one for India, and now there's one. This one is from Kenya, if I remember correctly. And also the former CEO of Apple, John Scully, is now heading a company called Obi, and their World Phone, again, really beautifully designed product, is on the same price range. And these are really good devices. The compromises that have been made here are not really, they don't matter that much anymore. So you can do really good stuff with these. They might not be able to run the latest photo editing app or music creation app as fast as your own iPhone, but all the normal functionalities of a smartphone are really pleasurable in these devices. And again, if you're talking about the kind of aspirational people, young people in the cities, they are already kind of starting to move into this price range because they understand that this will get better experience for them. It will help them to do things faster, do more things on their one and only digital device. And the second thing from technical constraints you have to keep in mind is that whatever internet connection you have here through Wi-Fi or 4G is very different to what the internet in sub-Saharan environment is. So it's threefold challenge. First is the coverage. So cell towers with data are not that densely placed than what we have here. The reliability of those, so even if you would have a data connection tower, it might be down because it was cloudy day yesterday and the cells didn't charge on the tower because those might be also kind of out of the grid electricity-wise. And then even if you have the connection, the speed is going to be far less than what we have here. So most of Africa is still using 2G, 3G is gaining market in cities, but still not in the same kind of numbers that we have here. And 4G is just non-existent at the moment. And this kind of same challenges also apply for Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is not as generally available in public places as what we have here in the Western markets. And even if you have it somewhere, it might be down, or the speed might be really, really slow, again, compared to what we have here. So based on these technical challenges, the low-end Androids and the connectivity things, we then made this Funsi.mobi mobile site and teamed up with Facebook's internet.org. It kind of helps in both of those aspects. First, of course, because it's accessible on all devices, even the feature phones. But because it's a really super simply built mobile website, it runs really fast on low-end Android as well. And of course, it scales to modern smartphones as well. And it works on all the platforms. And also the internet.org, if you don't know it, it's really fascinating initiative led by Facebook, really aiming at getting internet access for free for people who haven't had the access earlier on. And they're really putting a lot of effort in reaching audiences that have been unreachable earlier. So they are now setting up satellites that will beam up internet connectivity from space to Africa. So it's really kind of super high-tech stuff, even if we're talking about low-end devices and emerging markets, but kind of really aspirational stuff that Facebook is doing on this front. And I think it's, as a designer, it's really freaking cool that next year our product by designs will be beamed to Africa from space, from a satellite. It's kind of a space fanboys dream, one dream come true. I've extended my promised 30 minutes time quite a lot, so I'm going to do the epilogue bit really fastly. Just kind of give an update of what we're doing lately with Funzi. So we really realized that big part of our target markets just started arriving at our doorsteps because of the immigration crisis happening in Europe. And we kind of understood that we can do something for these people or also here, not just on the other side of the world. And really quickly we built first initial set of learning and information content called About Finland, sourced from various trusted sources, and then edited for mobile consumption. And this is really targeted for people who have just reached Finland, who need to understand the basics of how things are in Finland, what is the language like, what is the immigration process like, and what are their rights, what are their obligations. And we also now have the content in Arabic, which already reaches a big part of the people who have arrived to Finland in the few recent weeks. And what we are aiming to do is really, we are now kind of just on this immediate information need phase for these people, just trying to get a basic understanding for them when they arrive. But our core idea really is in making a midterm impact in getting the people really integrated into society if they are allowed and decide to stay here for years. Kind of really start that integration while they are still in the refugee centers. And maybe even build some kind of feedback loop that if people stay here for a while, they take some of the learnings they have gotten through Funzi when they go back to the home countries and maybe start doing things based on what they learned about entrepreneurship in those countries as well. And we are expanding this same thing that we have been doing for the refugees here in Finland. We have now operations at place on Sweden and Germany, and similar kind of basic info packages are coming out in just a few weeks, and plan is to kind of get it expanded throughout Europe by the end of this year. So that's all from me. Any questions at this point?
I have one question. Is that so we are famous in, for example, in Finland, that we had Facebook but better and earlier gallery, and we had Twitter but better and earlier Jaiku, and so what? How can you prevent that? Funzi, you were right. You thought it all right, but you were better and earlier. How to avoid that? How? Maybe my question is that you had these 3 good points there. Know your customers and so forth. But what I was missing is that how to instigate your users, how to market these virally or otherwise, and how to get them on top of their minds, and how to get them know this.
Yeah, the good thing is that there's not a lot of competition for mobile learning in emerging markets at this point. It doesn't, of course, mean that it will stay that way until the end of the world, but at least at this point, all the e-learning players, the major ones, are really focusing on the Western markets and have been really focusing on the desktop-laptop paradigm. And they're just kind of now started to figure out what would make sense on mobile, but really, again, just for the Western markets. So I think that's going to be our major upside for at least a couple of years. And hopefully during that time we are able to build a product that really is as sticky as, like you said, that really kind of keeps people coming back and provides stuff that they are not able to get anywhere else, and is being spread virally because people feel that this has made an impact on my life. I want to share this with my friends and family, and so we've been doing really well on the marketing side with really low effort. So we're mainly doing just Facebook marketing and then reaching out to our local partners in these African countries and been gaining a lot of traction from there. And we kind of created one model of doing this in first country and then replicated that successfully with similar kind of metrics to two other countries. So it seems that we have a setup in place which we can use to get Funzi expanded, at least in the current situation, really nice.
Because, for example, this Finnish Fruko company, e-commerce company, was, according to one explanation, failing because they didn't want to spend enough marketing in the first place. Zalando came here and took all the TV commercials for 1 year and for half a year and then continued. So,
but we are in the top 5 listings on app stores on education in all these countries where we are present. So I think we can afford to stay on a relatively low marketing budget for now. It seems that the model that we have that is quite low cost is good enough for now. But of course, if the competition toughens, if it feels that we are not reaching enough people, then of course we need to put more efforts in marketing.
So your apps is free, I suppose. So do you get revenue from advertisements?
Yeah, it's using Funzi for learning is always free for the users, and the revenue model is so that we find commercial partners who have an interest either in getting their own learning-related material spread to the audiences that we have reached to. So it might mean like a global NGO like UNESCO or WHO. So they are already spending millions and millions of dollars every year printing out leaflets and trying to distribute them inefficiently for these markets. So if we save them these millions and they pay us just a fraction of those saved millions, everybody wins. But it would also mean that it might be, let's say, a local bank that has an interest in creating more entrepreneurships in their operating region. Because if they are entrepreneurs, they need to set up bank accounts, and so there are other kind of ways of monetizing the audience as well. Not through advertising in a banner kind of way, but more kind of a partnership and promotion kind of way.
What's the main topics that you teach through Funzi?
It's really at the moment focused on how to make a living for yourself. So there's the entrepreneurship stuff that we have, and then there's job skills stuff that we have. And again, it kind of really sounds really basic coming from the Western situation, but it really has the huge impact for the lives of the people there. And then the well-being is the one that we kind of want to expand to next thematically, but we don't have anything on that out yet. And then the refugee thing is kind of a completely separate track that we kind of are now figuring out here in Europe.
One of your earlier slides showed, I think it was 54 million people between 15 and 24.
Yeah.
And what was the end of that sentence? That they didn't have access to?
They didn't have access to, or at least they hadn't finished basic education, primary education, yeah.
Okay, because on that slide, from what I remember, you said these are the people that we're targeting. And then later you said, but they need to speak English, they need to all these things, which to me means that that's not actually who you're targeting. Because if they haven't finished primary education and you're in countries where English isn't a national language.
Yeah, I understand the point.
Yeah.
So really, just find the slides. So this really is our target market. The slide
this
with
was
the
your target market, but before in the blue slide you said this is our target market.
Yeah, well then I spoke something I shouldn't have spoken, or made it very unclear. But what I was trying to make a point with that is that there's a huge amount of people who don't have access to education, and they might lack the skills to improve their lives. But of course, if they don't speak English, if they don't have access to data, if they don't have the smartphone, then it's really hard and difficult task even for us to reach them. And that's not our kind of primary target group. So we are aiming at this kind of more low-hanging fruit at this point. but it was kind of just an example that what is the situation with the education system there in general. So some people luckily go through the basic education and get the kind of really core skills that then allows them to do things that we are targeting for them, or learn from things that we are targeting them for.
Yes, I want to know how can you measure the effectiveness of the course to the learner?
Yeah, we've been looking into how all these E and M learning companies measure and publish their success rates. So what we do in the learning courses is that we continuously quiz people on the stuff that they learned, and based on how well they do on the quizzes, we're able to calculate the kind of score for that course once they have reached the end. And so we've been able to kind of see how well they did, and we're also, of course, measuring what is the kind of overall completion rate, because if people just kind of drop out in a week from a month-long course, it doesn't really kind of have an effect. And looking at these kind of basic metrics and comparing them what is publicly available from these other M-learning, e-learning companies, that even with our just 1-year-old product, we are doing at least as well as these more established players, and in some metrics even better.
So what makes you different from the other M-learning and e-learning companies?
Well, like I said, there hasn't been really that many focusing on the emerging markets on the M-learning front. So
what's different compared to Nokia Life Tools, for example?
Nokia Life Tools doesn't exist anymore. That's the main difference.
No, that too.
Yeah. So it's really kind of hard to compare, because I really don't know of any good benchmark of M-learning platform that would be working on emerging markets specifically. So I think what we are doing is really something that nobody else at the moment is doing. And that, of course, kind of gives us liberties and some slack in that, because there's no competition. We can afford to do a little bit less marketing and still reach people and so on. But of course, we need to, as the competition comes, and I'm sure it will come at some point, then of course we need to speed up, which of course we are doing anyway. But
then one more question: you're producing the content yourself, right?
No, we're not a content production company. We are a content publishing and editing company. So we find.
Who creates the content that you're using?
Sorry?
Who creates the content that people are using?
Yeah, so we try to find partners for content creation. We try to find partners for commercializing the audience, and we try to find partners for spreading the word about the things in the local markets. So for the entrepreneurship course that what we have, it was produced by Aalto ES, so Aalto Entrepreneurship Society here in Otaniemi. So one of the kind of major entrepreneurship hubs in the world. And yeah, so we try to.
How about the Finnish immigration thing?
That's really based on already existing official or otherwise highly relevant and highly trusted sources. And for that we did a much more content editing than we usually do, because we didn't have the luxury of spending months in trying to negotiate and find commercial partners. But we just did what needed to be done, and now of course looking into more partners for language learning and so on.
Good. Thank you, Miemo. Let's hope that your company will succeed here and
It's looking good. Yeah.
Good.